Welcome back to Guided by Grace. Today we're diving into one of the most powerful and reassuring passages in the Bible, Psalm 91. Known as the Psalm of Protection, this timeless chapter has comforted, inspired, and empowered countless believers across centuries. But this isn't just another passage, it's a sanctuary of faith, a refuge where we find comfort, strength, and unwavering support from God Himself. Imagine this. You're in the middle of life's fiercest storm. Maybe it's a personal loss, a deep struggle. The future seems uncertain, and fear creeps in, making it hard to see a way forward. It's in these moments that Psalm 91 speaks loudest, offering us divine protection and reminding us that no matter how dark it gets, we are never alone. Every line of this psalm resonates with promises of safety, shelter, and peace. A reminder that God's presence is closer than we realize, especially when life feels out of control. But what makes Psalm 91 so uniquely powerful? It isn't just a poetic set of words or a comforting mantra. It's a call to courage, a call to trust, and a call to see God as our ultimate refuge. Each verse is a direct invitation into a relationship of trust, where we're reminded that God is not only our creator, but our protector, guiding us through every valley and lifting us over every mountain. From the mighty imagery of His wings sheltering us, to His angels guarding us in all our ways. Psalm 91 is packed with vivid, hope-filled metaphors that make God's presence feel tangible, even in our most vulnerable moments. Over the centuries, this psalm has been embraced by saints, warriors, leaders, and everyday believers who have sought courage and resilience in its words. Whether they were facing physical battles, spiritual trials, or emotional storms, they found that these words weren't just for ancient times. They were living, breathing promises. Imagine soldiers reciting these verses before heading into battle, mothers praying over their children, or seekers of peace reading them in quiet solitude. Psalm 91 has been their fortress, their courage, and their unwavering shield. In today's world where uncertainty and fear are all too common, Psalm 91 invites us to shift our focus. Instead of dwelling on the fears of what if, it challenges us to rest in the assurance of He will. It shifts our gaze from our fears to our faith, from our anxieties to the assurance of God's faithful presence. Through this series, we'll explore how each line of Psalm 91 speaks to us personally, how it can strengthen our faith, deepen our trust, and remind us that no matter what challenges we face, we're anchored in the steadfast protection of a loving God. So, whether you're already familiar with Psalm 91 or hearing it for the first time, let's journey together through its verses. Let's unpack its profound promises and discover how these ancient words of hope are just as relevant and powerful today as they were when first written. Stick with us as we reveal what it truly means to dwell in the secret place of the Most High and live under the shadow of the Almighty. By the end of this journey, you'll see Psalm 91 not just as words on a page, but as a lifeline, an invitation to live in God's peace and protection, no matter where life takes you. The heart of Psalm 91 lies in the concept of trust. Trusting that God's protection surrounds us even in the face of the most intense, visible, and invisible threats. Whether these dangers are physical, emotional, or spiritual, the psalm paints a vivid picture of God as a fortress and a shelter, guiding us through life's darkest moments. This isn't just about removing fear or avoiding hardship. It's about embracing the calm and assurance that comes from knowing that God is with us every step of the way. To think of God as a fortress is to envision a place of absolute strength, somewhere that provides complete security. When Psalm 91 describes God in this way, it isn't suggesting that we'll live free of hardship but rather that God's strength is unwavering and can support us no matter what we face. For example, St. John Paul VI, who survived multiple attempts on his life, spoke openly about his trust in God's protection. In 1981, after an assassination attempt in St. Peter's Square, he famously said, "One hand fired the bullet and another guided it," attributing his survival to divine intervention. His belief in God's protective strength allowed him to face global conflicts, political strife, and personal health crises with courage and faith. St. John Paul II's life shows that making God our fortress means anchoring ourselves in His strength, especially when life feels unpredictable. God's presence becomes the steady foundation that allows us to stand firm, just as John Paul II did, regardless of the external chaos. In the same way, when we face personal challenges, Psalm 91 invites us to trust that God is our fortress, a safe haven that remains unshakable, even when the world around us is anything but stable. One of the unique aspects of Psalm 91 is its promise of protection against both visible dangers and unseen internal struggles. The psalm speaks of deliverance from the snare of the fowler and perilous pestilence, hinting at threats that might come upon us suddenly or go unnoticed. This theme resonates with the lives of many Catholic figures, especially those who devoted themselves to serving others in environments full of hidden dangers, such as disease or violence. Saint Damien of Molokai, a missionary to people with leprosy in Hawaii, is a powerful example of this kind of trust. He lived among those suffering from leprosy, a disease that was both physically dangerous and socially isolating. Although he ultimately contracted the disease himself, St. Damien never stopped trusting in God's protection, believing that his mission to serve was worth any risk. He once said, "I make myself a leper with the lepers to gain all to Jesus Christ." His faith in God's care wasn't about avoiding risk, but rather about trusting that God would provide the strength to carry out his calling, regardless of the cost. St. Damien's example teaches us that Psalm 91's protection is about God's presence in our lives, even in dangerous or difficult environments. When we face unseen threats, whether it's illness, personal crises, or even spiritual battle, Psalm 91 reminds us that God's care is always active, guiding and guarding us through every struggle. In times of crisis, the imagery of God as a refuge becomes incredibly meaningful. The phrase, "He is my refuge and my fortress" in Psalm 91 invites us to take shelter in God, finding rest and peace, even as challenges swirl around us. Pope Francis has often spoken about God's protection as a source of hope and calm during uncertain times. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Pope Francis stood alone in a rainy St. Peter's Square, praying for the world. In that poignant moment, he symbolized the faith that God's protection is constant, a reminder that God is with us in every storm. In his speech, Pope Francis said, "We are not alone. We are all in the same boat, and Jesus is here with us." His words echoed Psalm 91's assurance of God's presence. Pope Francis's approach to crisis is a reminder that while God's protection doesn't mean avoiding hardship, it does mean we're never alone in facing it. Even in the toughest times, God's refuge offers us a place of peace, allowing us to anchor ourselves in His love and strength. Psalm 91 also speaks to the emotional struggles that often go unseen by others. When it says, "You shall not be afraid of the terror by night," it acknowledges the internal fears that can creep in, especially in vulnerable moments. This line reminds us that God's protection covers our hearts and minds, giving us the strength to overcome anxiety, doubt, and fear. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, known for his deep faith and powerful messages, spoke openly about facing inner battles with courage. He often encouraged believers to look to God for peace in times of anxiety. During his popular television show Life is Worth Living, he reminded viewers that God's love was stronger than any fear they might experience. Sheen's life was an example of relying on God's strength to combat inner struggles, trusting that faith could overcome fear. Fulton Sheen's teachings connect deeply with Psalm 91's message of protection over our hearts and minds. This psalm assures us that, like Sheen, we can find comfort and courage in God's presence, allowing His love to replace our fears. When we dwell with God, He becomes our protector against both the visible and invisible struggles, helping us face life's challenges with a steady heart. In our modern world, filled with rapid change and global uncertainty, Psalm 91's message of protection feels more relevant than ever. From health crises to economic instability, we're constantly confronted with threats that test our faith and resilience. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, has emphasized the power of Psalm 91's promises during times of crisis. In the wake of events like the September 11 attacks and the COVID-19 pandemic, he has frequently reminded his congregation of God's steadfast care, encouraging them to anchor themselves in the strength of Psalm 91. Cardinal Dolan's words highlight a key aspect of Psalm 91. God's protection is as relevant now as it was when the psalm was written. It's a reminder that even in the face of modern dangers, God's promises remain timeless. Like Dolan, we're encouraged to place our trust in God's care, knowing that His protection covers every part of our lives. Psalm 91 assures us that no matter how much the world changes, God's presence is a constant, guiding us through every fear and uncertainty. Psalm 91 emphasizes that God's protection isn't just a momentary relief, it's a foundation we can build our lives upon. The line, "In Him I will trust," isn't a simple declaration. It's a decision to place our full confidence in God. Saint Teresa of Avila, a reformer and mystic, demonstrated this trust in a profound way. Despite facing intense opposition and physical challenges, she chose to anchor her life in God, seeing Him as both her refuge and fortress. In one of her most famous writings, she declared, "Let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you. All things are passing, God never changes." Saint Teresa's trust in God was her source of strength, allowing her to overcome obstacles that would have otherwise seemed insurmountable. She understood that God's protection was more than just a safety net. It was a foundation that gave her resilience. Like Saint Teresa, Psalm 91 calls us to live with unshakable trust in God, allowing His promises to become the foundation of our lives. Psalm 91 invites us to dwell in the secret place of the Most High, a phrase that implies more than simply turning to God in moments of crisis. To dwell with God is to live in an intentional, ongoing relationship with Him, a relationship that becomes the very foundation of our lives. This idea of dwelling suggests a constant presence, a choice to make God's care our home and His promises our daily reality. In Catholic tradition, many saints and leaders have exemplified what it means to dwell continuously in God's presence. This concept isn't about seeking God only when we're in trouble, but rather about anchoring our lives in His love and guidance every day. Through this choice to dwell with God, we find not just protection, but a deep, abiding peace that reshapes how we face the world's uncertainties. To dwell in God's presence is to allow His guidance and protection to shape every aspect of our lives. This relationship requires a daily commitment, a conscious decision to make God the center of all that we do. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, known as the Little Flower, embodied this concept in her approach to faith. Despite living a life confined to a Carmelite convent, Saint Thérèse made every small action a reflection of her love for God. But hey, Dwelling in God's presence meant living with intentionality, seeing each moment as an opportunity to grow closer to Him. Saint Therese's little way teaches us that living in God's presence doesn't require extraordinary actions. Instead, it's about finding God in the everyday details. By choosing to focus on God in the smallest acts, Saint Therese created a life entirely grounded in His love, demonstrating that dwelling with God is less about grand gestures and more about a heart dedicated to Him. Psalm 91's call to dwell with God challenges us to renew our trust in Him daily. This isn't a passive relationship, but one that requires effort and intentionality. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, developed the daily examen, a practice that encourages believers to review each day, noticing God's presence and guidance in all things. For Ignatius, staying close to God was an active pursuit, a way to align one's life with His will continuously. The examen teaches us that dwelling in God's presence means taking time to reflect, to recognize His hand in our lives, and to recalibrate our focus each day. Ignatius's method shows that building a life with God at the center is a journey, one that requires us to engage actively with Him rather than relying on occasional prayer. This practice encourages us to keep our hearts aligned with God, ensuring that our trust in Him is continually renewed and strengthened. Psalm 91 emphasizes that God's protection is connected to our decision to dwell with Him. When we make God our dwelling place, we are building an unbreakable foundation, one that provides peace and strength even when life is uncertain. Saint Catherine of Siena, a mystic and reformer, modeled this unwavering trust. Despite facing enormous challenges, both politically and personally, Saint Catherine's life was rooted in her closeness to God. Her trust in God's presence and promises gave her the courage to speak out and advocate for reform within the Church. Saint Catherine's life is a powerful example of how dwelling with God can give us the resilience to face adversity. She understood that God's promises were more than words, they were the bedrock of her faith. By making God her permanent refuge, she was able to navigate life's storms with courage and conviction. Like Saint Catherine, we're called to place our trust in God's protection, allowing His promises to become the foundation that sustains us through all of life's challenges. The invitation to dwell in God's presence also offers a refuge from the noise and distractions of modern life. Cardinal Robert Sarah, a prominent spiritual leader and author, often speaks about the importance of silence and solitude in cultivating a close relationship with God. In his book, The Power of Silence, Cardinal Sarah argues that silence is essential for hearing God's voice and finding true peace. For him, God's presence is a refuge where one can step away from the chaos of the world and reconnect with the essence of faith. Cardinal Sarah's teachings remind us that dwelling with God sometimes means finding quiet in our lives. When we intentionally seek silence, we create space to hear God's guidance, to rest in His promises, and to experience His peace. This kind of dwelling isn't passive. It's a deliberate choice to step back from distractions and find rest in God's presence. Like Cardinal Sarah, Psalm 91 calls us to view God's presence as a place of peace, a shelter from the noise that surrounds us. Psalm 91's message of dwelling with God is also a call to let our relationship with Him transform every aspect of our lives. Saint Teresa of Avila, a reformer and mystic, often wrote about experiencing God's presence deeply in prayer. Her writings, particularly in The Interior Castle, explore how dwelling with God changes us from within, leading to a peace and strength that is unshakable. Teresa viewed this relationship as a journey of transformation, where each level of closeness to God brought a new understanding of His love and protection. For Saint Teresa, Dwelling in God's presence was an experience that reshaped her life. She found that in God's presence, her fears, doubts, and struggles were transformed. Her story teaches us that when we make God our dwelling place, we're inviting Him to change us, to mold us into people who reflect His peace and love. Like Teresa, we're called to allow God's presence to reach every part of our lives, trusting that He will transform our hearts in the process. Psalm 91's invitation to dwell with God isn't just about finding safety. It's about finding a peace that endures, a trust that allows us to face life's challenges with confidence. Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, the first American-born saint, provides a modern example of what it means to live a life grounded in God's presence. Despite facing illness, financial struggles, and the loss of her husband, she trusted in God's care, finding peace even in hardship. Saint Elizabeth went on to establish the first Catholic school system in the United States, motivated by her unwavering faith and dedication to God. Saint Elizabeth's story reminds us that dwelling in God's presence brings us strength that sustains us, even in times of suffering. Her life shows that making God our dwelling place is a choice that brings not only protection but a deep sense of purpose and peace. In the same way, Psalm 91 encourages us to place our trust in God's care, building a life that is unshakable, rooted in His constant presence. Psalm 91 describes abiding under the shadow of the Almighty, an image that suggests both protection and intimacy. To abide under God's shadow is to live in close proximity to Him, finding comfort and rest in His care. St. John Bosco, known for his work with youth and his deep trust in God, understood this closeness well. Despite facing numerous obstacles, including threats from those who opposed his mission, St. John Bosco remained faithful, relying on God's shadow to protect and guide him. St. John Bosco's faith in God's presence illustrates that abiding under God's shadow isn't about removing difficulties, but finding rest amid them. He trusted that God was with him, watching over his every step. This is the assurance that Psalm 91 offers us. When we dwell under God's shadow, we're never alone. His presence provides both peace and strength, allowing us to face challenges with confidence, knowing that His love surrounds us. Psalm 91 presents God as both a refuge and a fortress. These images are more than just metaphors. They represent a powerful, unyielding strength that offers us shelter, even in the most challenging times. In ancient times, a fortress was designed to withstand the fiercest attacks, providing protection to those inside. By calling God a fortress, Psalm 91 invites us to see Him as our unbreakable source of safety and strength, one that can weather any storm. This view of God as our fortress has provided comfort to believers for centuries. Catholic saints and leaders have demonstrated how anchoring oneself in God's strength can help navigate every kind of hardship. These examples remind us that God's presence isn't passive. It's a dynamic, active force that offers both physical and spiritual protection. To consider God as a fortress is to see Him as a reliable source of strength and resilience. St. Augustine of Hippo, one of the Church's greatest theologians, offers a profound example of this reliance on God. In his early life, Augustine sought fulfillment in worldly pleasures, only to find that nothing could satisfy his soul. After his conversion, he came to view God as his true fortress, a place of ultimate refuge. In his writings, especially Confessions, Augustine speaks of God as the strength that allowed him to overcome his own weaknesses and desires. Augustine's life shows us that God's fortress isn't just a place of physical safety. It's a spiritual stronghold where we can confront our inner struggles. Like Augustine, we may face moments of doubt, temptation, or fear, but by making God our fortress, we find the strength to overcome. Psalm 91 assures us that God's protection is both external and internal, helping us stay steadfast in the face of any challenge. Psalm 91's reference to God as a refuge offers an image of a place where we can find shelter and rest. This isn't just about physical protection, but a reminder that God offers us a place of emotional and spiritual renewal. St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, the first U.S. citizen to be canonized, embodied this concept throughout her life. Known for her work with immigrants in the United States, she faced enormous obstacles, including financial hardship, opposition, and personal illness. Yet, she often said that God was her refuge, the source of her strength and courage to continue her mission. St. Francis Cabrini's example demonstrates that God's refuge is a place where we can renew our spirits, especially when we feel worn down. Her trust in God's shelter allowed her to accomplish incredible work, establishing schools, hospitals, and orphanages across the United States. Like Francis Cabrini, we're invited to turn to God as our refuge, finding renewal and strength in His presence, no matter how challenging our path may be. Psalm 91's promise of protection extends to every part of our being, including our hearts and minds. The verse, "You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day," speaks to the fears that can plague us, both in the quiet moments and in the face of visible threats. Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, a renowned Catholic preacher, often spoke about overcoming fear through faith. He encouraged people to view God's love as a shield that could guard their minds from anxiety and doubt. Sheen's message reminds us that God's protection covers even the intangible battles we face, the fear, worry, and anxiety that can seem overwhelming. When we make God our refuge and fortress, we allow His love to shield our minds, giving us peace in moments when fear threatens to take over. This protection isn't just about avoiding physical harm, it's a defense for our hearts, offering us peace in place of fear. For many believers, God's protection is especially meaningful in the face of persecution or opposition. Saint Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish priest and martyr, demonstrated what it means to rely on God as a fortress even in the most extreme circumstances. Imprisoned at Auschwitz, Kolbe offered his life in place of another prisoner, trusting that God's strength would sustain him. His final days were marked by prayer and a calm presence, a testament to his unwavering faith in God's protection, even as he faced death. St. Maximilian Kolbe's life illustrates the depth of trust that Psalm 91 calls us to embody. His faith in God as his fortress gave him the courage to face unimaginable trials with grace and peace. Like Kolbe, we're reminded that God's protection isn't limited by our circumstances. Whether we face opposition, persecution, or hardship, we can take refuge in God's strength, knowing that His fortress is unbreakable. Psalm 91 introduces the comforting idea that God commands His angels to guard us. He verse, "For He shall give His angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways," suggests that God's protection is detailed and personal. The Church has long taught about the role of guardian angels as part of God's protective care. St. Pio of Pietrelcina, commonly known as Padre Pio, had a strong devotion to his guardian angel, whom he believed provided him with protection, comfort, and guidance. Padre Pio often encouraged others to trust in their guardian angels, viewing them as heavenly protectors appointed by God. His relationship with his guardian angel serves as a reminder that God's care isn't limited to the physical realm. It includes spiritual guardianship as well. When we trust in God's protection, we can have confidence that His angels are watching over us, guiding us through both seen and unseen dangers. Psalm 91 assures us that God's protection isn't restricted to certain moments. It covers us in all your ways. This means that every step we take, Every decision we make is under God's care. This idea is beautifully demonstrated in the life of Saint Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus. Saint Joseph's role in protecting Mary and Jesus on their journey to Egypt shows the trust he had in God's guidance, despite the uncertainties they faced. He followed God's directions faithfully, even when the path seemed dangerous. Saint Joseph's story reminds us that God's protection is with us in all aspects of life, from our work to our family and faith journeys. Just as Joseph trusted in God's guidance, Psalm 91 calls us to rely on God's protection in every situation, confident that He is with us every step of the way. Psalm 91 speaks of abiding under the shadow of the Almighty. This powerful image suggests a close, intimate relationship with God, where we find both protection and rest. Saint Teresa of Avila, known for her deep spirituality and mystical experiences, often spoke of God's presence as a place of rest and renewal. In her writings, particularly in The Interior Castle, she describes the peace and security that come from dwelling in God's shadow. For Saint Teresa, God's shadow was more than a place of safety. It was a refuge for the soul, a source of peace that could not be shaken by the troubles of the world. Her life and writings remind us that God's protection isn't just about guarding us from harm. It's about creating a sanctuary where we can find true rest. When we dwell under the shadow of the Almighty, we're choosing to live close to God, allowing His love and strength to cover us completely. Psalm 91 is more than a promise of protection. It's an invitation to surrender fully to God's care, to trust in His protection with a whole heart. Each verse calls us to let go of our own control and place our lives in God's hands, finding peace in His promises. This kind of surrender isn't easy. It requires a deep faith that God's will is better than our own, and that His love is unfailing. The invitation to surrender is a call to relinquish our anxieties, knowing that God's strength and guidance are more than enough. Many Catholic saints and leaders have demonstrated this total surrender to God, showing that a life lived in trust is a life lived in true freedom. By giving up their own agendas and accepting God's will, they became vessels of His love, experiencing a deep peace that came from trusting fully in His care. The call to trust and surrender in Psalm 91 begins with releasing our fears and allowing God's peace to fill our hearts. This isn't a passive process, but an active choice to place our anxieties in God's hands. St. John Paul II, who often spoke of the power of trust, famously said, "Do not be afraid. Open wide the doors for Christ." These words weren't just encouragement, they were a call to release fear and embrace a life of complete trust. St. John Paul II's message resonates with Psalm 91's invitation to surrendering. Even as he faced global challenges, health issues, and personal threats, he continually chose to place his fears in God's hands. For him, true courage came from a deep trust that God's love would carry him through any hardship. This surrender of fear allowed him to serve with a fearless heart, demonstrating that when we let go of anxiety, we make room for God's peace to transform us. Psalm 91's promise of protection calls us to let go of our desire for control, choosing instead to embrace God's will. This kind of surrender can be challenging, especially in a world that values independence and self-reliance. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, founder of the Jesuits, understood the importance of surrendering to God's will. His famous prayer, the Suscipe, embodies this spirit of trust. Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will. Give me only your love and your grace. With these, I will be rich enough. Saint Ignatius's prayer reflects a profound surrender to God's will, a willingness to release every personal desire and ambition in favor of God's plan. His life shows us that when we let go of our own agendas, we find a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment. Like Ignatius, Psalm 91 invites us to embrace God's will, trusting that His path leads to a life of true freedom and peace. Surrendering to God's protection also means finding peace in the face of uncertainty. Psalm 91 encourages us to trust that God's guidance will lead us, even when the way forward is unclear. Saint Teresa of Calcutta, or Mother Teresa, is a powerful example of this trust. Known for her work among the poorest of the poor, Mother Teresa faced times of spiritual darkness, feeling distant from God's presence. Despite these inner struggles, she continued to serve, trusting that God was with her, even if she couldn't feel His presence. Mother Teresa's life demonstrates that surrendering to God's care doesn't mean we'll always feel certain. Instead, it's a choice to trust in God's faithfulness, even when we walk in the unknown. Like Mother Teresa, we're invited to lean on God, knowing that His shelter is constant, whether or not we feel it. Her story teaches us that true surrender is about choosing faith over feelings, relying on God's promises as a foundation for peace. One of the most profound invitations in Psalm 91 is to surrender even in times of suffering. This kind of surrender asks us to trust that God's presence is with us, that He has a purpose even in our pain. Saint Therese of Lisieux, known for her little way, embraced this surrender fully. Struggling with illness for much of her life, Therese chose to offer her suffering to God, seeing it as a way to grow closer to Him. Her spiritual writings reveal a soul completely surrendered, trusting that God would use her pain for a greater purpose. Therese's approach to suffering is a reminder that God's protection doesn't mean avoiding hardship. It means finding His presence in it. Her example shows that when we surrender our pain to God, we allow Him to transform it into a source of grace. Like Therese, Psalm 91 calls us to trust that God's hand is at work, even in suffering, turning our struggles into opportunities for spiritual growth and closeness to Him. Psalm 91's image of abiding under the shadow of the Almighty speaks to a life lived in confidence, knowing that God's care surrounds us at every moment. This confidence isn't arrogance, it's the quiet assurance that comes from a deep relationship with God. Saint Francis of Assisi embodied this trust in his life of humility and simplicity. Leaving behind wealth and comfort, Francis chose to rely completely on God, trusting in His provision for every need. Saint Francis's life reminds us that true confidence comes from depending on God, not on our own resources. His choice to live under the shadow of the Almighty allowed him to find joy in simplicity, freedom from anxiety, and the courage to serve others. Like Francis, Psalm 91 invites us to find confidence in God's constant care, to live in a way that reflects our trust in His protection. Psalm 91's ultimate invitation is to surrender fully, allowing God to become our refuge and fortress in every area of life. This surrender means trusting Him with our fears, our plans, our suffering, and our uncertainties. It's a life lived with open hands, willing to receive whatever God has planned for us. Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, the first American-born saint, embraced this surrender through a life filled with loss, financial hardship, and illness. Despite these challenges, she trusted that God was her refuge, finding peace and purpose in serving others. Saint Elizabeth's story shows us that surrendering to God's protection isn't about escaping difficulty, but about finding strength in His presence. Her life was a testament to the freedom that comes from trusting fully in God's care, even in times of trial. Like Elizabeth, Psalm 91 calls us to make God our fortress, trusting that His love and guidance are more than enough to carry us through. Psalm 91 ends with a promise of long life and salvation, a reminder that our ultimate protection is in God's eternal care. This final promise calls us to place our hope in God's plan, trusting that He is with us both now and in the life to come. St. John Henry Newman, a theologian and writer, often reflected on the idea of surrendering to God's ultimate plan. In his famous prayer, he wrote, "I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next." St. John Henry Newman's trust in God's plan reflects Psalm 91's assurance of God's eternal protection. His prayer reminds us that even when we don't understand, we can trust that God is guiding us toward His purposes. Like Newman, we're called to surrender our lives fully to God's care, confident that He holds our future, both in this life and the next. The final verses of Psalm 91 express God's unwavering commitment to those who trust in Him, promising deliverance, honor, and salvation. This promise is not merely for a life free of hardship, but for a life filled with divine love, purpose, and ultimate fulfillment. God's protection is about experiencing His peace and strength in this life, as well as the promise of eternal life to come. Psalm 91 concludes with an invitation to live fully in God's protection and love, finding satisfaction in His promises. In the lives of saints and Catholic leaders, we see how fully they embrace this divine protection, allowing God's promises to guide, comfort, and sustain them. By living within God's promises, they found freedom, resilience, and joy that allowed them to fulfill their missions on earth with confidence. The promise of deliverance in Psalm 91 is central to God's care. To be delivered means to be saved from harm, freed from the burdens that can weigh us down. This deliverance can be physical, emotional, or spiritual, offering us freedom to live fully. Saint Teresa of Avila experienced this freedom firsthand. Known for her deep spiritual experiences and mystical encounters with God, she often spoke of the freedom that comes from trusting in His promises. For Saint Teresa, God's deliverance wasn't just about escaping difficulties. It was about finding strength in His protection. She once said, "God alone is enough," emphasizing that true freedom comes from depending entirely on Him. Teresa's life of faith reminds us that when we embrace God's promises, we are delivered from our fears and empowered to live fully in His love. Psalm 91 promises that God will honor those who love Him, a word that signifies God's deep appreciation and love for His followers. This isn't an earthly honor, it's a spiritual affirmation, a recognition that our lives matter to God. St. Francis de Sales, known for his humility and kindness, understood this concept deeply. Despite facing opposition, he continued his mission with grace, driven by a desire to honor God in all things. He famously taught, "Be who you are and be that well," encouraging others to trust in God's unique calling for each person. St. Francis de Sales's life demonstrates that honoring God brings us into a life of purpose and dignity. When we live in the assurance of God's promises, we can find joy in serving Him, knowing that His honor and love define our worth. Like Francis de Sales, we're invited to live with confidence, knowing that God honors and values us as His beloved children. Psalm 91's final promise of salvation is the greatest fulfillment of God's love. Salvation isn't only about safety in this life, it's the assurance of eternal life, a life spent in the presence of God. St. Augustine reflected on this ultimate promise often, viewing salvation as the goal of every soul's journey. In the City of God, he wrote about the joy of living in God's eternal kingdom, a promise that brought him hope even amid earthly struggles. For St. Augustine, salvation was the culmination of God's promises, a fulfillment that allowed him to live with purpose, unafraid of life's challenges. This promise of eternal life is a reminder for all of us that God's protection extends beyond the here and now. When we place our faith in Him, We are assured of a future that is secure and filled with His presence. Like Augustine, we're called to live with our eyes fixed on this ultimate promise, allowing the hope of salvation to guide us through every part of life. The closing line of Psalm 91 promises that God will satisfy us with long life and show us His salvation. This satisfaction goes beyond physical longevity. It speaks to a life that is spiritually fulfilling, one that leaves us deeply content in God's presence. St. Thomas Aquinas, a theologian known for his pursuit of truth, saw the promise of satisfaction in God as the height of human happiness. In his writings, he explained that true fulfillment can only be found in God, the ultimate source of peace and joy. St. Thomas's pursuit of wisdom and understanding was driven by a desire to know God more fully, seeing this as the greatest source of satisfaction. His life reminds us that when we live within God's promises, we experience a peace that nothing else can offer. Psalm 91's assurance of satisfaction invites us to find our fulfillment in God, to allow His presence to be our source of contentment in every part of life. The fulfillment of God's promises in Psalm 91 isn't just for our own benefit, it's a call to share His love with others. St. Philip Neri, known for his joyful spirit, viewed his life as an opportunity to share God's goodness. His faith and laughter were contagious, drawing many people closer to God. St. Philip's life was a reminder that God's protection and love are meant to inspire us to serve others, to bring His light to those in need. St. Philip's example encourages us to live out the promises of Psalm 91 in a way that impacts the world. When we live in God's protection, we can share His joy with others, embodying the peace and confidence that comes from knowing we are held in His care. Like St. Philip, we're called to let our lives reflect God's promises, spreading His love to everyone we meet. Psalm 91's closing promises of deliverance, honor, satisfaction, and salvation invite us into a life of complete assurance in God's love. This isn't just about feeling protected. It's about living with the joy and peace that come from knowing we are God's beloved. Each promise in this psalm is a reminder that we are cherished by a God who desires to see us flourish. Catholic figures across history have lived in the fullness of these promises, showing that God's protection and love transform not just our individual lives, but also our communities and the world around us. From St. Teresa of Avila's unwavering strength to St. Augustine's hope in salvation, these lives show that God's promises are real, available to everyone who seeks Him with a sincere heart. Psalm 91 invites us to embrace the joy of living in God's promises, to let His protection and love fill every part of our lives. When we live with this assurance, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding, a satisfaction that only comes from knowing we are fully loved by God. This psalm's final message is a call to surrender fully to God's promises, allowing His presence to become our source of strength, peace, and joy in every moment. Psalm 91, with its promises of protection, deliverance, and salvation, calls us to live boldly and with purpose, not only for our own peace, but as witnesses to the power of God's love. Each verse invites us to embody a life of faith, to become a testament to God's protection in the world. When we live with the assurance of Psalm 91, we're not only transformed ourselves, we become vessels of hope, courage, and peace for others. In Catholic tradition, saints and leaders have shown what it looks like to live out Psalm 91's promises with purpose. Their lives became powerful testimonies to God's faithfulness, inspiring countless others to trust in His love. By following their example, we're called to take God's promises to heart and share their transformative power with those around us. Living out Psalm 91 begins with a willingness to share God's promises with others, through both words and actions. St. Paul, one of Christianity's earliest and most influential missionaries, demonstrated this in his ministry. Despite facing imprisonment, physical hardships, and rejection, St. Paul trusted in God's protection and used every opportunity to share the message of salvation. His letters, full of courage and faith, continue to inspire believers around the world. St. Paul's example teaches us that living out Psalm 91 isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about standing firm in faith and using our lives to point others to God. Like Paul, we're called to be witnesses to God's promises, speaking words of hope and demonstrating His love through our actions. This witness is a powerful way to bring the assurance of Psalm 91 to life, showing others the strength and peace that come from trusting in God. One of the most profound ways to live out Psalm 91 is by embodying a spirit of peace even in difficult times. When we carry God's peace within us, we become a calming presence for those around us, reflecting the confidence that comes from dwelling in His protection. St. Catherine of Siena, a mystic and reformer, embodied this peace throughout her life. Known for her wisdom and courage, she was often called upon to resolve conflicts and offer guidance to leaders, including the Pope. St. Catherine's life shows that when we live with God's peace, we become a source of strength and comfort for others. Psalm 91 calls us to let go of anxiety, trusting that God's protection is with us. By living in this peace, we show the world that true tranquility comes not from external circumstances, but from a relationship with God. Like Catherine, we're invited to be a calming presence, reflecting the peace that comes from abiding under the shadow of the Almighty. Psalm 91 also calls us to live courageously, trusting that God's strength is sufficient for any situation. This courage is seen in the life of Saint Joan of Arc, a young peasant girl who led the French army with an unshakable faith that God was guiding her. Even in the face of imprisonment and martyrdom, Joan remained steadfast, declaring that her trust was in God alone. Her courage in adversity was a powerful testament to her faith. St. Joan of Arc's life is a reminder that living out Psalm 91 means standing firm in our convictions, even when faced with challenges. Her bravery teaches us that true courage is rooted in trust in God's protection, allowing us to face adversity without fear. By embracing this courage, we become living testimonies to God's strength, inspiring others to place their trust in Him as well. To live out Psalm 91 is also to show compassion to others, offering them the same protection and love we've received from God. Saint Vincent de Paul, known for his dedication to the poor, demonstrated this compassion in every aspect of his ministry. He believed that by serving the least among us, we could reveal God's love and protection in a tangible way. His life of service was a direct reflection of the promises of Psalm 91, as he worked to be a refuge for those in need. St. Vincent's example shows us that God's protection is not meant to be kept for ourselves, but shared with those around us. When we reach out to help others, we embody the sheltering love that God offers to all. Like Vincent de Paul, we're called to extend God's care and compassion, showing the world that His promises are alive and active through our hands and hearts. Psalm 91 invites us to live with purpose, using the gifts and talents God has given us to serve others. St. John Bosco, a priest and educator, dedicated his life to helping disadvantaged youth, creating schools and vocational programs that empowered them to build better futures. His faith in God's protection and guidance gave him the strength to pursue his mission despite opposition and limited resources. St. John Bosco's life shows us that when we live out Psalm 91, we find purpose and meaning in God's plan. His dedication to helping others was a testament to his trust in God's provision and protection. Like John Bosco, we're encouraged to use our unique talents in ways that serve others, fulfilling our purpose with faith and confidence. When we live out the promises of Psalm 91, we become beacons of hope for those around us, showing them the peace, courage, and joy that come from trusting in God. Blessed Carlo Acutis, a young Italian teenager who used his passion for technology to spread the message of God's love, exemplifies this. Known for his devotion to the Eucharist, Carlo created a website that documented Eucharistic miracles around the world, hoping to inspire faith in others. Carlo's life reminds us that we don't have to be extraordinary to live out God's promises. We simply have to be faithful. His legacy inspires people of all ages to trust in God's care, showing that even the youngest among us can make a difference. Like Carlo, Psalm 91 calls us to live as witnesses to God's love, using our gifts and passions to spread hope in the world. Finally, Psalm 91 invites us to embrace life's journey with faith, trusting that God's promises are with us in every season. Saint Monica, the mother of Saint Augustine, is a beautiful example of this faithfulness. Despite many years of hardship and prayer for her son's conversion, Monica never gave up hope. Her perseverance and trust in God's promises eventually led to the conversion of Augustine, who became one of the Church's greatest saints. Saint Monica's life teaches us that living out Psalm 91 requires patience and trust, knowing that God's timing is perfect. Her journey of faith reminds us that God's promises are always at work, even when we can't see them. Like Monica, we're invited to live with steadfast faith, trusting that God's care surrounds us at every stage of life. Psalm 91's promises inspire us to live as witnesses to God's love, courage, and faithfulness. Each saint and leader we've explored shows us that living in God's protection isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about embracing them with faith, reflecting His love in every area of life. By choosing to live out these promises, we become beacons of hope, encouraging others to trust in God's care. Psalm 91 invites us to live with purpose, faith, and a deep trust in God's unwavering promises. When we embrace these promises, we discover a life filled with courage, compassion, and peace that touches the world around us. In the end, Psalm 91 becomes more than a personal prayer. It becomes a call to action, a way of life that radiates God's love and invites others to experience the fullness of His protection. Psalm 91 is a powerful guide for our spiritual lives, offering promises of protection, peace, and strength. But how can we take these promises and make them a real part of our daily routines? Part of the beauty of Psalm 91 is its practical relevance. It's not just a poem or prayer, but a way of life that shapes our actions, thoughts, and relationships. Living out Psalm 91 is about integrating God's promises into our day-to-day lives, allowing them to transform our perspectives and bring us closer to Him. Incorporating the truths of Psalm 91 in a practical way involves intentionally creating habits and practices that help us remain rooted in God's presence. By doing so, we can experience His peace and strength more fully, even amid the challenges of modern life. One of the most practical ways to live out Psalm 91 is to start each day with prayer and reflection. Before jumping into the busyness of the day, take a few moments to place yourself in God's hands. Reading a portion of Psalm 91 or praying through its promises can set the tone for the day, reminding us that God's protection is with us in every moment. Some believers find it helpful to memorize a few key verses from Psalm 91, such as, He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. By keeping these words in mind, we carry God's promises with us throughout the day, allowing them to shape our thoughts and actions. Psalm 91 speaks of dwelling in the secret place of the Most High, suggesting a close personal connection with God. Creating a dedicated space for prayer can help us cultivate this sense of dwelling with God. This doesn't need to be a large space. It can be a corner of a room with a candle, a cross, or other items that remind you of God's presence. Setting aside time each day to pray and reflect in this space can deepen our relationship with God, making His protection and presence feel more real. Just as saints like Saint Ignatius of Loyola found strength in daily prayer, creating a dwelling place for God in our homes can help us live out Psalm 91's promises practically. Gratitude is a powerful way to recognize God's protection and provision in our lives. Throughout the day, take moments to thank God for His presence and protection, whether it's for small blessings like a safe commute, a good conversation, or an answer to prayer. By acknowledging God's care in the little things, we cultivate a heart of gratitude that draws us closer to Him. Saint Therese of Lisieux practiced gratitude daily, finding God's love in the small details of life. Her little way reminds us that God's protection is evident in even the most ordinary moments. Practicing gratitude helps us see God's promises in action and strengthens our trust in His care. Psalm 91 promises freedom from fear, yet fear is something we all encounter. When fear or anxiety arises, turn back to Psalm 91 and remind yourself of God's promises. Verses like, "You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day," can bring comfort when we feel overwhelmed. Repeat these promises to yourself, allowing them to replace fear with faith. Consider following the example of Saint Joan of Arc, who faced her fears by trusting in God's strength. When we choose to confront fear with faith, we invite God's peace into our hearts. By actively choosing faith over fear, we live out Psalm 91's assurance that God is our refuge and fortress. Psalm 91 isn't just a promise for personal protection, it's an invitation to extend God's love to those around us. Look for opportunities each day to show compassion and kindness, whether through listening, helping someone in need, or offering a word of encouragement. By being a source of comfort for others, we mirror God's sheltering love and share the peace we've found in Him. Vincent de Paul dedicated his life to serving the poor, embodying God's love and protection. Like Saint Vincent, we can make God's love visible to others by living in a way that reflects His care. Living out Psalm 91 means becoming a source of refuge for those around us, showing them the security and peace that come from God. At the end of each day, take time to reflect on where you saw God's hand in your life. The practice of the daily examine, introduced by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, is a simple but powerful way to review the day and recognize moments of grace. Reflect on how God's promises in Psalm 91 were present in the day, thanking Him for His guidance and protection. By reflecting on God's faithfulness each evening, we build a stronger awareness of His presence in our lives. This habit not only strengthens our trust, but also helps us end each day with peace, knowing that God's promises are with us even as we rest. Psalm 91 invites us to pray for protection, not only for ourselves but also for our loved ones. Each day, take a moment to ask for God's protection over family members, friends, and those in need. Trusting in His promises for others can be a powerful act of faith, allowing us to intercede on their behalf. Saint Monica, the mother of Saint Augustine, spent years praying for her son's conversion, trusting that God's care would ultimately bring him closer to faith. By praying Psalm 91 over those we care about, we invite God's protection into their lives, sharing the blessings of His promises with those we love. Finally, living out Psalm 91 means bringing God's promises into every part of our lives. Whether at work, school, or with family, let God's protection guide your actions and choices. Remember that His promises are with you in every situation, offering you peace and courage no matter the circumstances. Living out Psalm 91 in practical ways means that we let God's presence define our perspective. Each of these practices helps us experience His protection more fully, reminding us that God's promises aren't confined to prayer time. They are meant to shape our entire lives. Psalm 91 is an invitation to live each day with faith, purpose, and an unwavering trust in God's love. By incorporating these practices into our daily routines, we make room for God's promises to become active and transformative. Living in His presence brings a peace that surpasses understanding, a strength that endures, and a love that empowers us to serve others. As we embrace these practical ways to live out Psalm 91, may we find comfort, courage, and joy in knowing that God's promises are real and alive in our lives. Let Psalm 91 become more than words on a page. Let it be the foundation of a life filled with purpose, protected by His love, and inspired to share His peace with the world. As we conclude this journey through Psalm 91, we're left with something far more than just understanding the scripture. We're left with a transformative invitation. Psalm 91 is a call to step into a life of faith, trust, and deep communion with God. It's a reminder that God's protection isn't just for moments of crisis, but for each day, guiding and comforting us as we navigate life's ups and downs. Psalm 91 reveals a beautiful truth. God's care is unwavering. He is not only our protector, but our refuge, our fortress, and our strength. And His promises go beyond earthly protection. They reach into eternity, providing a peace that surpasses all understanding. It's as if, through these verses, God is gently inviting each of us, "Come, dwell with me. Find your rest, your courage, and your strength in my presence." In a world full of fleeting assurances and temporary securities, Psalm 91 offers something unbreakable, a foundation of faith that stands firm, regardless of what we face. This psalm isn't a guarantee of a life without trials, but it's a promise that in every trial, we have an unfailing ally. Psalm 91 shows us that no matter what storms may come, we can find shelter under God's wings. His love surrounds us, His angels guard us, and His presence gives us strength. It's a peace that lifts us above our fears and sets our hearts on solid ground. And so, as we step back into our lives, let's carry these words with us. Let's allow the promises of Psalm 91 to remind us of who we are, beloved children, of a God who never leaves, never fails, and never ceases to care. When challenges arise, let's remember, we have a refuge. When fears begin to creep in, let's remember, we have a fortress. And when doubts cloud our minds, let's stand firm in the unshakable truth that God's promises are real, alive, and active in our lives. If Psalm 91 has spoken to you, I encourage you to continue exploring its message. Let it be a reminder that every day you have the choice to dwell in the presence of the Almighty, to let His words of peace and protection sink into your soul. Keep coming back to this psalm, especially in moments of uncertainty. Let it be a place of refuge, a source of strength, and a reminder that you are held securely in God's hands. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and may you walk forward in the light of God's protection, finding comfort, courage, and strength in His promises. Remember, no matter where you are or what you're going through, Psalm 91 is more than a chapter. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to live in God's peace, to to trust in His protection, and to know that you are never alone. Here on Guided by Grace, we believe that these words aren't just ancient text. They're a lifeline, a guide, and a reminder of a love that is steadfast and true. Let Psalm 91 continue to guide you, to protect you, and to inspire you to live each day with faith. And until next time, may you dwell in the secret place of the Most High, confident that His shadow covers you, His love surrounds you, and His promises carry you through every season of life. Thank you for being here with us, and may your heart always find refuge in the embrace of our unshakable protector. See you next time on Guided by Grace.